Next up, we have a panel with Dr. Jason Worth on the De-Colonial Cascadia, the Poetics of De-Colonial Cascadia, moderated by Dr. Jason Worth. But before we get started, a couple of reminders. If you haven't already done so, make sure you make the effort to go downstairs and see the beautiful work of art. The book Heavy Lifting is on display in the downstairs area. It was recently acquired by the Bainbridge Island Museum of Art, BIMA. We have a day filled to the brim with exciting talks and workshops and panels, all in the name of poetry and place in the Cascadia bioregion. And again, thank you all for joining us. And remember, go to the Cascadia Poetics Lab and make your contributions to support this type of work and activities. And because that's significant in helping us continue this. And so coming up now, Dr. Jason Ward.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. Our Cascadian Zen Volume 1 and Volume 2, one of the many ways in which they could be described is this is a radical experiment in decolonial place-based aesthetics and activism. Really a view that emerges in defiance of political economy and born of political ecology. And it takes off the table the following sorts of things: borders, dispossession of indigenous peoples, human and non-human, capitalism, the nation state, industry. It's a view from below. And towards that end, we have three extraordinary practitioners and experimenters and beautiful voices of these sorts of concerns, this sort of positionality that finds extraordinary expression in language. And so I'm extremely happy to introduce our three speakers. You know them all already, but I'll just say a couple of brief words. First is Paul Nelson. If one person is known by all in this room, it's Paul Nelson. So I could list all of his books, but I would be telling you something you already know. So I thought I would say a couple of things lesser known about Paul. He likes satay. He told me that's a hint. He's also the sine qua non of why we're here. I mean, it's tremendous, lifelong, organizational, and poetic energies that have made this all possible. He's the seed that took advantage of the soil. That's a fact. He's also, this is a new thing in his life, he's become a serious student of Zen. So the Cascadian Zen Party said, Zen, I want to be a person who tried that. And try it he does. But extraordinary mind and speaker, and really one of the great treasures of my life to be able to call him a friend and a brother. Second is, let me make sure I get all my notes here. Sara Marie Ortíz, a Como Pueblo poet, performing artist, filmmaker, and an indigenous peoples activist. She earned her BFA at the Institute of American Indian Arts and an MFA from Antioch University on their Los Angeles campus. Her poems have been published in journals such as Plowshares, the Canadian Review, New Poets of the American West, and the anthology Sing, Indigenous Poetry of the Americas. If you don't have these books yet, I advise you, please change the status of your library. She's the author of a collection of poems, Red Milk. She received the Truman Capote Literary Fellowship, a Brigham Young Morningstar Creative Writing Award, and an American Indian Graduate Center Fellowship. Daughter of the poet Simon J. Ortíz, she is currently working on a documentary about her father's life and legacy. She works as an education administrator in Burien, Washington. And finally, someone who also really doesn't need any introduction at all. But if you wanted a really great one, I hope you were here last night when Bringhurst just lit this place on fire. And so we're all sitting here kind of scorched, but happily so, taking our burns. Yeah, wow. I mean, this is someone who arguably is the greatest living typographer and typography scholar. We're granular enough in our nerdishness to say that is an amazing thing to have to be true. Linguist, philosopher, and I would say really a singular voice in poetry. I mean, a Bringhurst poem that's in a column by itself. It really, really is. And he comes to us from the Quadra Islands Herrick Bay watershed. So we'll go in the order in which I've announced them. So Paul, and then Sara, and then Robert will, once again, light a fire at the end. So, please, Paul.
Gracias, Professor. Since Jason joined the board of the Cascadia Poetics Lab, the trajectory has been on that kind of an angle, and I'm grateful for everything that it brings to my life. I'm grateful to be on this panel with these amazing people. This is really an honor. The other people on the Cascadia Poetics Lab board, maybe they can just raise their hand, or if you're on a committee, raise their hand. These people also need to be pointed out as people that are making this thing go. Veronica Martinez, our new administrative assistant, what a relief it is to do the things that she's been doing with an expertise well beyond her years. The Suwood House, my spiritual community for 19 years. Before I did Zen seriously, I was a Latihan practitioner. Where's Marston Gregory? Marston, are you in the room? There he is in the back. Marston, if you want to learn about Suwood, he's the guy to ask. I think he was opened about 50 years ago, something like that. And he is a wise Suwood presence, and I consider him a teacher and a brother. So I'm grateful for Suwood Greater Seattle to let us have this place for this occasion, and for this occasion next year, November 1, 2, and 3. I think you get a sense of the power of the Latihan when you experience poetry events in this room. I really believe that. And so I'm also grateful to all of you for being here, because if you're not here, we're doing what we're usually doing, talking to ourselves. I think it's boring after a while. 11:09. I'm located, therefore I am. Kambu Mary Elder Mary Graham said that. Ah, to be alive on a mid-September morn, fording a stream, barefoot, pants rolled up, holding boots, pack on, sunshine, ice in the shallows, northern Rockies. Rustle and shimmer of icy creek waters, stones turned underfoot, small and hard as toes, cold nose dripping, singing inside, creek music, heart music, smell of sun on gravel. I pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the soil of Turtle Island and to the beings who thereon dwell, one ecosystem in diversity under the sun with joyful interpenetration for all. Gary Snyder, as if he's not been mentioned enough, and he probably will be mentioned several hundred times as we go on, because he may be the quintessential bioregional poet, was there when it was all beginning. We have a fourth member of the panel who has just arrived, Gabriella. If you come up, we have a chair for you here, and Jason will do an introduction. So I want to talk today about the poetics of the Cascadia Poetics Lab, how they developed, and hopefully what will come across is a sense of the radical, de-colonial, and soul-building nature of those poetics. As always, telling it slant, which is Emily Dickinson's advice, and my way, for better or worse. Gary Snyder, the quintessential bioregional poet, was there when bioregionalism was being formulated, and has the greatest short definition of bioregionalism, which Tim alluded to last night. But here's Gary's version. Stay put, watch what happens. How does this stance, staying put, contrast with what the bioregionalists have been saying since the 70s, that people live on this land like invaders? You see why Michael Daly called his book Re-Inhabited, and why he said when I interviewed him in July 2022 that bioregionalism is an anti-colonialist stance. To imagine national borders created by nature and not by white generals, sometimes using a map, is a transformative exercise. But thanks to David McCloskey's maps and life work, we don't need to imagine. That beautiful work is of David McCloskey. There's smaller versions of that map for sale, and also a map of the Ish River ecoregion. Beautiful, evocative maps that say more than 1,000 poems, I think. In 1992, I interviewed Peter Berg, mentioned earlier today, who founded the Planet Drum Foundation. They're 50 years old this year. In that interview, conducted a year before this organization was founded, he said, "The imperative is that we learn how to live in harmony with natural systems in sustainable ways. That means that the ways that we live should change. The kinds of things we would do to get basic human needs, such as food, shelter, water, and I would include culture in that, would be more adaptable to the place itself." Elsewhere, he said, one of the goals of bioregionalism is to support the work of reinhabitation, of people becoming native to the places where they live. David McCloskey and every indigenous elder would say we need a culture that comes up out of this place and is the place speaking through us. Peter and Gary and Diane DePrima and Joanne Kiger and others were saying in the 70s, Chief Seattle in the mid-1800s. And now we have the Anthropocene and checking the air quality index on summer, and not just on summer days. I checked it this morning to see what's the breathing going to be like today. I mean, can we play outside? It was taken as for granted, and kids today can't take that for granted because it's unhealthy air sometimes. And as I said in a poem once, it's weather will get their attention. I think they've got our attention now. In 1994, I interviewed Allen Ginsberg, who talked about open form, starting with Walt Whitman. First thought, best thought, which he likened to Buddhism, and the need for specifics in the poem. His paraphrase of William Blake, his paraphrase is better than the original, so I used what Allen said, that Blake said. Abstractions and generalizations are the plea of the hypocrite, knave, and scoundrel. The mind-writing slogans Allen collected for decades are a wonderful tool for getting this point across, and Andrew Schelling and Ann Waldman read several of those slogans when I interviewed them in 2001. You're seeing how the interviews weave through all of this and inform, and a lot of that audio is online and now being done as a podcast called Cascadian Prophets. Now, talk about specifics. Related to this is Charles Olson, who in his essay Human Universe talked about how particularism must be fought for anew, that discourse prevents discovery, is a dodge, and that the distinction here is between language as the act of the instant and language as the act of thought about the instant. So trying to close that distance. These notions resonate with me deeply and fall right into the kind of stance toward reality that Olson said brings a certain kind of verse into being. A stance that is systemic, radical, meaning affecting the roots, and one might say sustainable in the way Peter Berg was using it. A poetics that comes out of Alfred North Whitehead, and I think Huayan Buddhism with similarities to the writings of Dogen and Keiji Nishitani of the Kyoto School of Philosophy. That's who I want to talk to you about today, Jen. We must also note, we mentioned Charles Olson of Sharon Thiessen's brilliant research into the letters of Olson and Francis Boldereff, and Boldereff's influence on Olson's thinking. The Poetics of Cascadia Poetics Lab could very well be Boldereffian, and not just Olsonian and Levertovian. Levertov's Some Notes on Organic Form is one of the most cogent essays on the stance toward poem making that I think is foundational for this organization. We'll use her Overland to the Islands book as our main text in the 5-week online workshop that begins on a week from tomorrow, and then Thursdays after that. Poetics as cosmology and life as rehearsal for the poem. Talking about the commons, now that the air is compromised, we understand maybe we have a better understanding of what the commons is, those things that we share in communion. I love that Duncan quote about communion, of community, of communism. The Cascadia Poetics Lab has existed for nearly 30 years, despite the subversive nature of our content, of the radio shows, the podcasts, of the stance toward poem making, projective, spontaneous, organic, impersonal, a method that makes room for the prophetic, for discovery, and the cosmology that underpins that. Fred Moten mentions the phrase, the prophetic organization, in his book, The Undercommons. The members of this class of people considered by the university Moulton says is uncollegial, impractical, naive, unprofessional. It's a kind of perfectionism that confronts any attempt at passion. They're public administrators, including people in public health, environmental management, and nonprofit and the arts management. And Moulton says it's not difficult to see that these programs exist against themselves, that they despise themselves. That's what Fred Moulton said. This organization has existed as an alternative to that neoliberal ethos that has hypnotized this continent since at least the 70s. We were against it even before we knew what neoliberalism was. Sort of like what Robert Duncan said about language poetry, and I can't find the exact quote, but it's something like, I don't know what they're doing, but when I figure it out, I'm against it. No interview that I've done was more impactful on my own life than my October 1995 interview with Michael McClure. Interviews with Sam come close, but McClure was touring with his book 3 Poems in 1995. And the newest poem in that book was Dolphin's Skull. And Tim, I had a chance to bring this book backpacking to Appleton Pass, and I wanted to go further than that, but after the 13 switchbacks, the people with me said, we are not going any further, we'll do it here. And then I climbed to that mountain just to the side of it. You've told me the name of this mountain before, it's about 300 feet, that overlooks the Boulder Creek watershed.
Walrich.
Say it?
I think it's Walrich there.
Walrich,
Next to
yeah.
Appleton. Yeah.
Right? I'm seeing these lines in McClure's poem, Dolphin's Skull, capitalized, a double space, all on a page frame like this, more alive than I ought to be. And I thought, oh, I'm getting chills just thinking about that. I'm looking at this Boulder Creek watershed where we saw bears, and they're like, you blow the whistle, no, you blow the whistle. And having this phrase come up, I said to myself, I think I know what he's talking about. More alive than I ought to be. Oceans and freeways of grief and guilt, triumphs of bare feet and drugs up the nose, child of cocaine, raccoons and hollow. I could go on with the poem, but that gives you a taste of it. So I get a chance to interview Michael, and he says after the interview that if you like what I do, it's because you'd be interested in projective verse. So find this essay. Charles Olson wrote it in 1950. Read it out loud, because he wrote it in a style sort of imitating Ezra Pound, very pedantic, so read it out loud. So I took it to KPLU, where I was working once a week on the Thursday overnight shift. They called it the Groove Yard. Let the great preacher, Dale Bundry, called it that. And I went in production, and I recorded myself reading a couple paragraphs, put it on pause, got the next CD on, went back, and I did that, and I listened to it over and over and over and over again. It was a cassette. That tells you how long ago that was. And then I loaned it to someone and never saw it again. But then we reread it, and you can see it online and hear it while you're reading it, which I think is helpful. So when I started my graduate work, Michael said, don't stop with the United States poets. Look outside of the boundaries. And I didn't go too far. Vancouver with the Tisch poets, and of course the 1963 Vancouver Poetry Conference. If you've not seen that movie, The Line Is Shattered, it's a fantastic movie that gives you a sense of that time. And I also, Jose Kozer, I found him, and not in Cuba anymore since he was 20, so 60 years out of Cuba, but writing in Spanish and essentially a Cuban poet. He's a Latin American poet connected to the Neo-Barroco school, and then found people like Ramon Gomez de la Serna, and those strains influenced the poetics of the Cascadia Poetics Lab. Tisch, in particular, for writing from here, which is what they figured Charles Olson was telling them. A use of speech at its least careless and least logical is what Olson said in that essay. An act of discovery, a vision quest. As Michael said in October 1995, in the book 3 Poems, they're spontaneous and are as they were written, each one a kind of spiritual challenge, a very sweet possibility of taking a trip through experience that I've never had before. So this vision quest goes on with exercises like the Day Song, which I created for postcard poets who started taking workshops online workshops I mentioned. And after the Postcard Fest, where you sign up and you have to write 31 original poems on postcards in 56 days, So you're working with a spatial restriction. I thought, now let's exercise those other muscles and use a temporal restriction. So in the way that Bernadette Mayer did with Midwinter Day, if you don't know that poem, highly recommended, written on Winter Solstice 1978, wrote a 122-page poem in a day. Yes, she was doing a lot of study before that, and yes, she was doing a lot of cutting and pasting, but still, that's a monument. And if she never did anything besides that, she would have been known throughout history. And also the Canto Diurno of Pierre Joris, who we brought to town last year. He wrote this 20 or so page poem in a day, and I see that as a vision quest. And I asked Richard Atmeo, hereditary chief of the New Jutlands tribe, and I explained it to him. He says, absolutely, I agree, that's a vision quest. To write as much as you can in one day and see what the muse is trying to tell you, right? Projective, organic, bioregional, and active discovery, a commitment to hear, to the coots, osprey, eagles, ducks, song sparrows, geese, white-crowned sparrow, buffleheads, beavers, Caspian terns, and other critters of Nook-Wook-Wed, the creek that runs by my house and empties into Lake Washington, that someday may be completely daylighted, as I stay put here and watch what happens. Thank you.
So I first want to introduce to you Gabriella, Gutiérrez, and Muhs, and then Sara, you'll speak, and then Gabriella, and then Robert, you'll finish up. Gabriella is one of the really awesome things about teaching at Yale University, because that's where she teaches. I've been many places, far-flung places in the world, in which when I say I'm at Yale University, they go, oh yes, that's where Gabriella is. It's really a remarkable thing. Gabriella is a force of nature. When you first meet her, she's very quiet. She's, maybe doesn't speak too much. And then suddenly you realize, well, this is a sleeping volcano. And it's going to sleep about 2 more minutes before it explodes. And it's going to explode with incredible life. An incredibly powerful, resonant mind and voice. Fully bilingual, 2 worlds dance together to their mutual illumination, always in her work. And her work has been quite copious, quite well received all over the world. Just a couple of small highlights. First editor of Presumed Incompetent, The Intersections of Race and Class for Women in Academia. I hate to say she did some of her field research with my colleagues, research their shortcomings. Single editor of various other books on Chicana criticism, also authored and published the forthcoming poetry collections, Needing Words, Abusando Palabras, Intersectionality, Goodness, Intersectionality, Goodness, and Beyond, and Goddesses and Beyond, and How Many Indians Can We Be? She's also the author of A Most Improbable Life, The Runaway Poems, and The Plastic Book, all books that I esteem highly and recommend to you strongly. So we'll have Sara, and then Gabriella, and then Robert.
Good morning. Good morning, good morning. You guys can say it back, it's okay. We're all friends here, we're all relatives, we're shy. No, I'm very shy. I'm very, very shy. I love that. The metaphor of a sleeping volcano. I never fancied myself to be a volcano, but I think about what is possible with language, what is possible when we use our power at the level of the voice, and to tend to that power very carefully, with much care. I'm so grateful. firstly to all of you. You could be anywhere, and you're here with us, and that's a loving thing. It's an intentional thing. It's an act of intention. It's an act to be present, to be in physical space with one another, to share breath, to share energy, to share this beautiful, beautiful light. We know that the light is shifting already, even as we're speaking of it, from it, to it. I feel so grateful to be a part of this endeavor, this effort. 30 years, my God. It's so beautiful, so beautiful. Anytime that we live in and through poetry, through language, particularly that language which emerges from place, which everything does, all of us do. It's a special thing. It truly, truly is. And for Cascadia to have such a liberated and true heritage and supporting the poets of this region, there are almost no words. I feel very, very humbled to be a part of this sacred work. Want to say, I am a visitor here, I'll say that, and also I never go anywhere where I'm not called. This land, this water called me long ago, long ago. I'm what they call an elder millennial. Someone refers to me as a geriatric millennial. I heard that recently. It tickled me. Some refer to me as an elder in training. My people are the Acoma people. Has anybody been to New Mexico? Just New Mexico in general? Yay, love that. Just got back from Taos, a sojourn, pilgrimage of sorts to my home. Acoma, also known as Sky City. Has anybody ever been to Acoma, Sky City? I knew there'd be a few. Such a special place, such different terrain, to speak, to write, to pray, to sing from a place that is that place. Our sacred home that is Acoma, which is over 1,000 miles from here, but is also right here. I carry it with me always. That's one of I think, the more distinct pieces of my story, of my poem, prayer, song that is my life, is to travel from there to here and be always within the cycle of those migrations. Always returning, always leaving. I can't remember the writer, might have been Sherman, might have been God knows who else, but so that every poem, every piece of writing is either a story about leaving home or returning home, and I truly subscribe to that. I truly do. I am truly at home in this place. Where me and my partner Todd are just down the way. We're in Burien, which is sacred Muckleshoot territory. It's sacred place. I don't know if any of you have been down Burien way, but Lake Burien and Three Tree Point area are sacred places to the tribal peoples of this whole land. And again, those migrations. There were so many peoples who lived and cared for, loved from deeply these waters, these lands that we call home now. And that's never far from my mind. The migrations, of which I am a part, of which they were a part, which they will always be a part. There's no part of me that can write, that can live without that remembrance. And I would invite all of us, whether you're writing from the desert or you're writing from the shores of the sound or the beautiful lakes that we enjoy here, that you challenge yourself in that sacred way, in that old way, to write from place, to be deeply connected to place. I don't believe that you can write, that you can live and love truly unless you have that relationship with place. It's an old teaching. It's something that I've been taught since I was little, that all we are is story and all we are is place. it's especially important. There are so many diasporas, right? There's just multiplicities. Those who are coming and going, always wanting for home, whatever that is. But it's a truly important thing, especially as we all are space and time travelers, to have that at homeness, to have that connection to land and place, and be humble within it. Let it humble you. Be okay with not feeling at home all the time, but always be striving. Always be recommitting yourself to having that relationship with place. Being in that sometimes fractured place with so many my not so long ago ancestors, elders, taken as children, far, far from home. My own grandfather, my own father, grandfather taken when he was just a boy to a boarding school not far from our pueblo, and running away, finding his way back, somehow being taken back again and again. And so that fracture lives in me as well. It's one of the reasons why I recommit myself daily to this practice of being in relationship with land, with water, with sky, with one another, in a less fractured way. It's not something to be taken lightly. I've been asked many questions over time about being an indigenous poet, about being a native writer, and the poetics of that, the politics of that. And I think it's an important question. It truly is, because we're all in relationship with place in a different way, in a dimensioned way, a nuanced way, sometimes a fractured way. Listen to tribal people when they speak. Listen with your fullest self. There is a poetics and a politics of being indigenous, especially in 2023. Especially when it comes to that fracturing and all of those ways in which we reach for and fail again, and reaching back and forward at the same time, trying to honor those teachings that we hold so dear of our ancestors, some of them children ancestors, who were taken so long ago. Even in those fractured spaces where our tribal people, elders, even little ones who are attending our public schools all over Seattle, all over Washington State, speaking up from that land, speaking up from that water, speaking from those generations, from those ancestors way back, not so way back. Listen fully. I have to humble myself all the time in that way, though I am an indigenous person. And there are many ways to show up as an Indian, as a human, as a Native person, as an Yakama woman. I have to remind myself that there's so much more beyond the fracturing. That excised place that divides you between spirit and water and land, body, voice, one another. I am more than the fracturing. And so are all of us. We're here on this beautiful morning together. On this beautiful land, on this beautiful earth, even as she is suffering. She is suffering. We have to remember that. When we speak, we write, we sing, we pray from that space as well. And there is an acknowledgement there. Does anybody know the Shutsi word, the traditional word, the old word for that mother mountain not so far away? Shout it out if you know it. It's beautiful language, beautiful song. That's close. It's close to talk. I'm still learning as well. Talk. It's more of a and a B as opposed to an M or an H. But that beautiful name. There is so much in a name, right? So much power in names. We say to our tribal children, you know, I work in Highline Public Schools. Shout out to Highline, love Highline. love my sacred spot of earth there in Burien, but we work hard to serve our kiddos. And we tell our tribal children from the time that they're little, and it's especially important now as Indigenous people that we not be shamed for not speaking those old languages fluently, but if you can step out, take that healthy risk, a bold, creative risk, that liberated thing to speak even one word in those old languages, that is an act. It is an act of survivance, of strength and power, and your ancestors are smiling upon you even if you speak one word, and if you can learn a single word also, if you are a traveler, which most of us are, in that language that the land first spoke, which for us is the Shutsi here. If you have learned any of that language, there's so many beautiful documents and so many resources to learn more, if not, to become fluent in it, but to learn more about the language that this land knows, to sing the names of this land in its original ways. We really want our children to know that it's not a shameful thing. It's more than anything beyond English, because English is a shared language. It's a trade language, right? We're all bound by that in many ways, but to speak even one word, even in a shaky voice, in the original languages of the earth, the Shutsi, Gutiérrez, in my case, for my affluent people, Lakota, whatever those old languages are, Latin, and of course English is pretty old at this point as well, but there are some of those languages that have been almost unwritten from the historical record, and they are sacred languages. They are ones that we can all know, and that we can all be joined by. Don't be afraid. That's what we tell our children, is don't be afraid and don't be ashamed to learn, to read, to speak those languages, to sing and pray in those languages, even if it comes out a little shaky at first. Thank you so much for being here, for loving the land in the way that we all should. I hope that I'm somewhat on point about the purpose and the dream and the vision of the Poetics Lab, of this festival. Be in relationship with place and each other in a different way, in an old way, but also in a new way. And go forward in that knowing, in that joinedness. And also, I hope that you're participating in the rest of the festival, because I'll be participating in a reading tomorrow at the beautiful Gabriella garden. I'd love to share some of my writing with you. I know we have limited time, but thank you so much for letting me share just a few of my thoughts.
Thank you so much. Poetry is the language of love. We're all suffering from a dystopian society right now. The effects of colonization. We're all colonized. Every one of us in this room is colonized. And I'm so glad that you went first, because one of the things I want to talk about is that it's taken us so long to go back and highlight and understand that we have to center indigenous values and ways of living. I am indigenous, not from this area, not from the Duwamish, but I am indigenous from the Tepehuanos in Mexico. My father's Tepehuano. And Professor Lauro Flores at the University of Washington believes that Aztlán, the land that the Aztecs came from, could be Seattle, because it means land of lakes, land of hawks, right? So don't be surprised that there's so many of us coming over here. Oftentimes we understand ourselves in contrast with other people. And I do believe that Seattle is very indigenous, because people in Seattle have had to look at themselves in contrast with indigenous people. So even if you're not indigenous, you are indigenous. I also want to remind everybody that the aesthetics that we have, that we are all so proud of Seattle and how beautiful it is. Seattle was laid out by indigenous people. The paths, everything. Actually, West Seattle was supposed to be Seattle, right? But it was too windy. So we came to this side, or the pioneering people, settlers, because there was water. But these waterways, all of these ways that we love so much, right? Puget Sound, Lake Washington, Lake Union, they are places that indigenous people prepared for us to live here. So our imaginary, if you are in Seattle and you sink in it, you are part of that imaginary, of that world vision, that cosmovisión. There's so much to say. Poetry can be specifically conducive to understanding indigeneity, because it's a language of the heart and a representation of the spirit. And I just want to remind you that if you walk around here anywhere, you are. I have a problem with the word de-colonial or decolonizing, because the moment we mention colonialism in any way, we are colonizing, we're centering that, right? So I prefer to think of it as re-indigenizing, as many indigenous people do. And I also want to mention the word Nepantla to you, because I'll use it in a very short poem that I wrote for this, in which you are all participants. You all have to howl with me at howling time. Because I'm not speaking here just about words. In our Western mentality, we only think that words matter. There are entire towns, entire regions in Mexico, for example, where people communicate in whistles. And I don't know if is Tim here, who presented yesterday? Oh, Tim. I already wrote you a poem. because I always wanted to meet the men, the women, the indigenous people that made trails. You have opened up the world of nature to thousands and thousands of people, and I always wanted to meet someone. I didn't know anyone who had worked making trails. That is a language. That is a language. I think those are the most important poems you ever made. So Nepantla is a place in between. You're neither here nor there, you're in an interstice. And that's how we Chicanos talk about our cosmovisión, our world vision. Because it's here, it's there, and I want to talk about Seattle as Nepantla. And in between land, where we all are. We are learning, and that's why you're here today. You're learning, you're sharing. I want to tell you that the two things that I most treasured being a part of, one of them is today, and the other one was my wedding. And I was late to both of them.
Just not bad.
I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means because I've been married more than 30 years, but I just want to say that to you, that it's this anticipation and everything I felt this morning, everything was making me late because I wanted to enjoy precisely anticipation. I wanted to enjoy the time before getting here, before seeing you, because yesterday was so beautiful for me, walking in here and feeling all these eyes that caressed me. And I hope that you feel that my eyes caressed you as well. This is a poem you all are going to need to howl with me. In this Nepantla, in between land, a country of trees awaits. Read me a plant, read me a cloud, read me the interstice between your colonization and mine. My spirit howls at the coyotes. My companion, the dog, runs on one side of our continental constructed fence. She knows how to talk. The forgotten language of spirit. Thank you.
Like I promised, the volcano erupted. And now Robert.
Gabriella, you were right on time. see this map, this quite wonderful map. I want to say some things about this map. 아니 사오 땅아가리 남완수 을흑과마 후에 Hereabouts was all salt water. He was flying the raven, the raven, looking for land that he could stand on. That's the beginning of a poem, some thousands of lines long, by a man named Sky, a Haida poet who was born in the early 19th century and died in the very early 20th. In the fall of 1900, a linguist named John Swanton came from Maine to Haida Gwaii, those islands off the north coast of Cascadia. He spent 11 months taking dictation in the Haida language, learning it as he went along. But he wrote down some of the finest literature in the world. Some of us come from a line of people who used to pay attention to their own cultural heritage, and so they made it a rule that all their children went to school and learned Latin and Greek. And they got tired of that and decided it was more fun to make money and forgot about the Latin and the Greek. But if you live in North America, your real linguistic and intellectual heritage has to come from this country. So it is in languages like Gutiérrez, Haida, and Lushootseed, and Kwatwala, Sahaptin, Ninupu, Wailaki, that we find that heritage. And it is by luck, just as with the Greeks, that some of that great literature got written down, saved from the destruction of great oral cultures that would have lasted for many centuries more if they had only been allowed to do so. Cascadia is the colorful part of this map. It is the most of the northern part of the Pacific watershed of North America. There are three great watersheds in North America: the Atlantic, which is the largest, the Arctic, which is the smallest, though still very large, and the Pacific, which is only just a little bit larger than the Arctic watershed in terms of land area, but in terms of biomass, in terms of linguistic and cultural richness, it had more languages and more oral literatures than the other two watersheds combined, even though it was only about a fifth of North American land. This place that is, so convoluted, so full of mountains and creeks and glaciers and valleys and summits, and beautiful places, inhabited by people who have forever stayed where they were and seen what happened. This place was also rich with languages, just as it's rich with big trees and with underground fungi and with fish and with birds. In Cascadia alone, that part of the Pacific watershed, there were, that we know of, at least 77 indigenous languages. About 35 of those are still spoken. Some of them are spoken by one or two people. Some of them are spoken by more than 1,000. So if I say there are 35, we might wake up tomorrow and find that it's only 30. And not long after that, it will be 20. Well, nothing does forever. But things live longer if you pay attention to them. And if you live in this country, the literatures of those languages, saved by accident and by design with the help of people like John Swanton, the linguist, Franz Boas, his teacher, many others. Those literatures will pay you 1,000-fold for every day you pay attention to them. I would like to see the Cascadia Zen Anthology project live long enough to include a volume, at least as fat as Volume 1, composed entirely of contributions spoken in the indigenous languages of Cascadia, translated for everybody else's benefit into English, or maybe into many more languages than that. There's inexhaustible wealth here, hidden in manuscript collections, hidden in libraries, published in the old government publications, and big fat government publications, sometimes recorded on tape, sometimes recorded on old aluminum discs or wax cylinders, maybe 3 minutes of some beautiful old person singing a song or telling a small fraction of the story. It doesn't just happen by flipping a switch. There's a lot of work involved. But it is wonderful work to do. The politics of indigenous language study can get pretty steamy and thick sometimes, and so you have to know why you are doing it and what it is that you really want to do, because otherwise people will scare you off. Other people will welcome you, but people care deeply about these things as they should. So you have to know why you're there. And the study of these things is part of re-inhabiting this world, which is not compatible with building more pipelines, digging more coal, fracking more oil out of the deep earth. It's really not compatible with that. So you have to choose what you are willing to give up as well as what you are willing to work in order to regain. Thank you.
Those were 4 extraordinary testimonies. Thank you all so much. Wow. We started about 5 minutes late. It's noon right now, so I'll give us 5 minutes. That will be enough for 1 or 2 questions. Depends on how concise they are. At least 1. Or comment.
Doesn't give any time for answers.
Briefly from each of the people, what brings you joy?
Singing and watching people. I'm a people watcher. I just love being alive.
Has anybody ever seen a film called Over the Top? late 80s with Sylvester Stallone. So I wanna say a bad word right now, but so effing good. Oh my God. We watched it last night. If you don't know about Over the Top, it is the definitive film about arm wrestling. It's an arm wrestling championship, you guys. I have a new goal in life, actually. I'm gonna go. This brings me joy. I love being in space with other people, as difficult as you guys can be, as difficult as we all can be. It brings me joy to hear the poem song that Gabriella just spoke, just being alive. There's a testament in that, just being alive, being able to say words, breathe breath. It's an incredible thing. See Over the Top. It's good stuff.
I was giddy on Thursday when I picked up Andrew Schelling and Amy Evans McClure at the airport. I was giddy again picking up Felicia and Teresa. Giddy meeting some workshop participants and postcard poets who I'd only seen, as Skylar said, in the Zoom box. So there's a giddiness which is akin to joy, Catalina. But in 2019, when I was diagnosed with chronic lymphocytic leukemia, scared the crap out of me because my grandmother, my mother's mother, Ada Solani Roque, died of leukemia in her 50s. So I thought, holy shit, what do? I looked to Louise Hay, as any intelligent person would, and see what the mental pattern associated with that affliction is. And she said, look at blood disorders. And it said lack of joy, lack of circulation of ideas. And I thought about this, and I journaled about it, and I talked to folks about it. And it's like, is my joy this little sparkler while everyone else is having these glorious fireworks displays? And then I realized, no, you just fetch about a lot of shit and prevent yourself from having joy. So stop that. And see joy in everything. And in this corner of the room, Evan Padilla, who's no longer with us, said, Paul, I believe the foundation of joy is gratitude. And I woke up every morning after that and looked at our view of Lake Washington and Rainier Beach and started a free associative poem of the things I am grateful for. It was just one thing after another. You can go on a long time if you want to. And then the lack of circulation of ideas. Look at this room, right? You were helping me with my health. At very least, what a beautiful gesture it is for you, to me, to be in this room, to hear these amazing people who I share the stage with, and previous ones, and be part of this work. All of you are part of this work, whether you understand it or not. I think, I see nodding heads saying, yes, I get it, that it's work. When I tell people little things about the fest, I say, thank you for being part of this work. Thank you for being a postcard poet, these kinds of things, because it is work and there's a lot of it to do. So thank you for being part of this work, and thank you for sharing in my joy and circulation of ideas.
All real things. Rocks, trees, birdsong. The light, the darkness, life and death. All real things. For which we should all be grateful, as you said.
All big shine. Thank you so much, all four of you. That was unforgettable, and it's now lunchtime, but thank you.